Welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ. Going through the list, welcome to the Tuesday Nighters. Welcome to the book club, and welcome more directly to the suggestion box. And this week, the 56th week of suggestions, we're going to Malachi 3 and 4. I know this is odd. I made a soft commitment to you that we would try to do one chapter a week unless we get something odd in the suggestions like we had this time, which was one chapter, which was 18 verses, and one chapter, which was 6 verses. Combined, it's only 24 verses. Combined, it's only 748 words. So I thought I would make that executive decision, and maybe impeached for that, but I hope not. So let's get to it. We're in Malachi 3 first. I'll do a little bit of an overview for this, then we'll shift to Malachi 4 in my overview, and we'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of maybe what was happening here. First, we have to read these chapters for what they represent. And I want a bit of a pause here so that we stop and really consider this. This was the end of an era. And I wonder if Malachi even realized that his words would complete this holy record, the Old Testament. I don't believe he did, but I certainly believe God did. So here, some 450 years before some of this would take place, which places us about 430 to 420 years before Christ's birth, we see a little bit of prophesying going on in this third chapter of Malachi. Now, remember what the Old Testament was, or is. The Old Testament served as the precursor to Jesus' message. Listen to me. In a nutshell, that's what the Old Testament was. Now, we all know this. It was much, much, much more than that. But when you bring it down to its singular purpose, it was the precursor to salvation, to the message of redemption, to the message of recovery. 24 verses before the end of the Old Testament, which puts us at Malachi 3:1. So I'm going to say it again. 24 verses before the end of the Old Testament ends. God spoke directly concerning this huge awaiting occurrence. He said to us that John the Baptist, he called him my messenger, would trumpet in the Savior of all mankind. And here we are, 450 years before this was going to take place. And soon and very soon, to the end of this chapter, there would be silence for some 400 plus years. And so this purpose first verse was critical as a trailer, if you will. If you go and if you know something's coming on television or something's coming, there's always a commercial of sorts. This first verse was that commercial. I will send my messenger. God then immediately, to make sure he set the tone at the end of this Old Testament that had to hold for 400 plus years, he immediately questioned mankind as to who among them would be able to uphold his law. He said it I kind of did it in clips. Who may abide? Who shall stand? He talked about the word as a refiner's fire. He talked about the law that he shall purify. He shall purge them. Then he introduced the Son a couple verses later. The offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant, he said. And finally, God the Father self-introduced and said, for I am the Lord, I change not. Still within this 18 verses, he then shifted his attention to the recipients, those who would read this chapter, those who would hear this chapter, those who would be reading the final verses of the Old Testament, and delivered his 5-word warning, which I find powerful. Yes, he's speaking to a purpose, but he's also speaking in general terms to what mankind had done with the preciousness before him. Yet you have robbed me. Now, again, speaking to tithing, but please understand, a verse is never just a verse. It's always much more. Read this for the fullness of its purpose. Yet ye have robbed me. Lovingly, God then provided their escape with his generous challenge which he used to tell them there would be a reward if they would but turn themselves around. And he says to them, prove me if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing. By the way, this stands today. This challenge stands for each one of you today. We who are robbers, we who are recovering robbers, he says to us, prove me. And he continued laying out his plan. As a protection to all who would accept accountability, and unfortunately, much worse for those who wouldn't. He reminded them of the great disappointments provided to him by his own, and he again provided his generous acceptance if they would choose between the righteousness and the wicked. Always a choice. We shift to the last 6 verses of the Old Testament. This, the chapter that closed out the entirety of the Old Testament. By the way, just for those of you who are historians, Malachi was said to be the last writer by chronological order, as well as the last book placed. We don't always find that everything kind of lays out in chronological order, but it did with Malachi. And so I believe that the words that he was inspired to pen and to write were from God, knowing where this would be placed in order to seal up and close out the Old Testament. Remember what God's Old Testament was. Remember what the Old Testament was. It was God's record of mankind, and more specifically, it was the record of Israel. What he said was his people. Okay, so this was the up-to-date documentation 400 years before Christ, the up-to-date documentation of the Creator's involvement with his creation. Sometimes specific, sometimes general, but always his involvement. So I believe he inspired this final chapter as a warning through his firm but fair judgment. Told you this before, I'll say it again. When we asked my mom about raising children, we said, do you have any counsel for us? She said, I'll tell you the greatest counsel I ever received, and I believe the best counsel I can give to you. Be firm but gentle. So God gave this firm but gentle warning to mankind. And Malachi laid out the choice that God would provide to all mankind. He addressed the proud. He addressed all that do wickedly, and gave the result, they shall be ashes. He also addressed those who would choose to love him. You that fear my name. He also spoke to those who would choose to serve him. Those who loved him would serve him. If you love me, keep my commandments, he said in the New Testament. Remember ye the law of Moses. He promised them he would provide the Savior. I will send you Elijah. The record then ended abruptly. The record was then sealed shut. The next record awaited its beginning, that being the New Testament. And in that 450-year wait, till it really culminated, all awaited God's salvation. And it came with this voice, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I would say, well worth the wait.